Melania Trump stood on the gleaming marble floor of the White House, but the part of her story most people miss happened long before Washington. Stay with me, because the choices she made before she ever met Donald Trump explain almost everything that came later. Melania Knavs was born on April the 26th, 1970, in the rural town of Novo Mesto, in what was then Yugoslavia, now Slovenia. She grew up in Sevnica, a modest industrial town on the Sava River, where her father, Victor Knavs, managed a state-owned car dealership, and her mother, Amalia, designed patterns at a children's clothing factory. Home was a concrete apartment block in a communist-era housing complex, brightened inside by her parents' taste for colorful walls and kept comfortable by their relatively stable income. The future First Lady's childhood was unglamorous and grounded. Classmates later recalled young Melania as polite, diligent, an angel, in the words of one school friend. In a typical scene from those early years, little Melania would sit beside her mother's sewing machine in the evening, watching intently as patterns turned into clothes. By day, she was a serious student, eventually serving as her school's treasurer. By night, she dreamed of fashion. Textiles were the lifeblood of Sevnica, and even the town's children got a taste of the runway. At just 5 years old, Melania walked in a local fashion show wearing outfits from her mother's factory, one of many workers' kids chosen to model the latest designs. Seeing her mother's creativity up close, she learned to sew her own clothes, tweaking hand-me-downs to fit her own simple style. It was a small but telling sign of independence and aesthetic sense in a girl growing up under the drab constraints of communism. As a teenager in the 1980s, Melania witnessed her country open gradually to Western influences. She later noted that watching US President Ronald Reagan on television marked the beginning of a new era in Slovenia. American movies, music, and fashion magazines seeped in, and she became fascinated by the wider world of style beyond her small town. At 15, she made a bold choice. Instead of a conventional high school, she enrolled in the Secondary School of Design and Photography in Ljubljana, the Slovenian capital. Every pre-dawn morning, she boarded a train for a 2-hour commute from Sevnica to Ljubljana and back, hundreds of miles each week, just for the chance to study in a more creative environment. The commute was grueling, but Melania persisted, quietly determined to expand her horizons. After a year of this routine, her father rented a small apartment in Ljubljana for Melania and her older sister Ines, sparing them the daily journey. In the city, the reserved village girl began to blossom. She graduated at 19 and enrolled in the University of Ljubljana's architecture program. But here her practicality and ambition collided. After just a semester, she left college to pursue modeling full-time. Years later, her personal website would falsely claim she earned a degree. The embellishment was removed amid scrutiny in 2016. Melania, she started using the more internationally friendly spelling of her name around this time, decided that experience on the runway mattered more to her than sitting in a lecture hall. It was a risky move, one few in her family or town would have anticipated, and it set off a chain of decisions that would eventually put her in the center of American politics, whether she wanted it or not. In January 1987, not long after she left university, fate intervened on the steps of a fashion show venue in Ljubljana. As Melania waited by the staircase, a well-known Slovenian photographer, Stane Jerko, caught sight of the tall 16-year-old with high cheekbones. She had just participated in a school fashion presentation, and something about her poise struck Jerko. He introduced himself and invited her for a test photo shoot. Melania agreed, and the black and white portraits Jerko took of the 17-year-old in early 1987 became her first real modeling portfolio. At the time, her dream was actually to be a designer, not a model. But Jerko's photos opened new possibilities. By 1988, she began picking up local modeling work in Ljubljana. Melania was naturally reserved, but in front of the camera, she exuded a calm confidence. Still, she stayed close to home in those early years, appearing in catalogs and occasional fashion shows in Yugoslavia. She hadn't yet imagined the global stage. Her first taste of international modeling came in 1992. At 22, Melania entered a contest called Look of the Year, sponsored by Jana, a Slovenian fashion magazine. She was named runner-up, impressing judges with her sculpted looks and quiet professionalism. The prize promised an international modeling contract for the top 3 contestants, dangling the prospect of work in Western Europe or beyond. It was just the break she needed. Through this contest, Melania signed with an Italian talent agency and moved to Milan, the heart of European fashion at the time. Yet her entry into the glamorous Italian scene was anything but smooth. In one of her earliest assignments in Milan, she won a role in a proposed commercial film project with the famed Cinecittà studio. But the opportunity turned sour fast, and Melania walked away from the project rather than compromise her dignity. An early lesson in how ugly the business could be. It was a formative moment. She would later recall this incident as her introduction to the ugly side of the business, and it steeled her resolve to succeed on her own terms. She continued doing catalogue shoots and runway shows in Milan, but kept mostly to herself, far from the party-going fashion crowds. By 1993, around age 23, Melania had shifted her base to Paris, sharing a tiny apartment with another model, future Playboy star Victoria Silvstedt, while they hustled for casting calls. Money was tight, competition fierce. Melania, fluent in Slovene and increasingly comfortable in English and Italian, carved out a niche as a reliable, if not yet famous, model. Her network remained small. Apart from a few relatives, she barely stayed in contact with acquaintances back home. The girl from Sevnica was now a young woman in Paris, one of countless hopefuls trying to make it. There were moments of doubt, but also glimmers of validation. Once, in an uncanny bit of foreshadowing, she was hired to pose as the first female president of the United States for a quirky fashion photo shoot in 1993. The concept was pure fantasy at the time, a playful magazine spread. Melania played the part earnestly, not knowing how strangely prophetic that image would one day seem. By 1995, Melania Naus, as she now styled her name, had been modeling in Europe for several years, with moderate success. That year she met Paolo Zampoli, a New York-based model scout and agent, at a party in Milan. Zampoli was gregarious, well-connected, and on the lookout for fresh faces to bring to the United States. He saw potential in the 26-year-old Slovenian with the calm demeanor. At his urging, Melania took a leap and moved to New York City in 1996 to give her career another boost. It was a brave move. By this point, she was older than many of the newcomers in the industry, an age when most fashion models were thinking of retirement, not a second launch. Zampoli understood this and had a strategy. He placed Melania in a midtown Manhattan apartment with a photographer he knew, arranged for her rent to be drawn from her future modeling earnings, and told her to immerse herself in the city's fashion circles. She arrived with only a few suitcases and a working knowledge of English, determined to prove herself. New York in the late 1990s was a thrilling, if unforgiving, place for an aspiring model. Melania kept a strict routine. She maintained a disciplined lifestyle. Early nights, healthy eating, no drugs, no wild clubbing, conscious that she had to keep her looks and reputation impeccable to survive. Surrounded by young models losing themselves in the city's nightlife, she stood apart, almost aloof. She later said she would only go out on rare occasions, and only if there was a purpose. Her seriousness paid off. In 1996, shortly after arriving, Melania landed a major billboard campaign for Camel cigarettes that plastered her image high above Times Square. The quirk of it was that an old law required cigarette ads to use models over 25, an age Melania had just attained, giving her a leg up on the many 18-year-olds in the industry. On the giant billboard, she appeared in a retro-styled photo by famed photographer Ellen von Unwerth. It was a coup for a newcomer and gave her a taste of celebrity. Thousands of New Yorkers saw her face every day looming over the avenue. Still, life was precarious. In truth, Melania shouldn't have been working at all in those first months in America. She had arrived on a short-term visitor visa, not a work visa. Yet, needing income, she took some early gigs before her paperwork fully caught up. Years later, that detail would be dragged back into the light, especially once her future husband made immigration a political weapon. But at the time, she quietly transitioned to a legal H-1B work visa and continued her ascent. In the evenings, after casting calls and go-sees, she'd retreat to her apartment and sketch jewelry ideas, or sew, hobbies that reminded her of home and someday, aspirations. New York could be lonely. "I never really had a lot of friends," she would say of that period. The young Melania was polite and professional, but kept her distance in the cutthroat Manhattan social scene. She did pick up some magazine work. A spread in Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue in 2000 was a highlight, and occasionally appeared at fashion parties. One such party, on a breezy evening in September 1998, would change her life forever, and you can decide for yourself whether it was luck, calculation, or something in between. That night, at a glitzy event in a New York nightclub, often cited as the Kit Kat Club, Paolo Zampoli introduced 28-year-old Melania Naus to a guest who needed no introduction, Donald J. Trump. Trump was 52, a tabloid-famous real estate mogul with a larger-than-life persona, and at that moment, still married, albeit separated, to his second wife, Marla Maples. He arrived with another date on his arm, but when he saw Melania, he was smitten. Melania's recollection of their first encounter paints a vivid picture. Donald sent his companion to the powder room and seized the moment to approach Melania. He wanted her phone number. Melania, unfazed and perhaps testing the billionaire's sincerity, coolly refused to give it to him. Instead, the self-possessed model countered that he should give her his contact information. Donald, taken aback but intrigued, complied, handing over a slip of paper with a half-dozen different numbers. His office, his penthouse, his Mar-a-Lago estate, you name it. It impressed Melania that he didn't just fob her off to an office secretary. "He gave me all his numbers," she noted with satisfaction. Only later did she explain her logic. She didn't want to be just one of the women he calls. By insisting on controlling the next step, she set the terms from day one. 1 week later, after Donald had finalized his divorce plans, Melania dialed him. They met for dinner, beginning a courtship between two extraordinarily different people. How would this unlikely relationship unfold? Melania soon discovered that dating Donald Trump meant entering a whirlwind of limousines, black tie galas, and relentless media attention. In the late 1990s, Trump was a fixture of New York gossip columns, and Melania's naturally private demeanor stood in contrast to his brash publicity-seeking. Early on, she made a point of not seeming overeager. Friends noted she often projected an indifferent air toward Donald in public, a tactic she consciously employed to keep his interest. It worked. Donald was accustomed to being fawned over, and Melania's calm, sometimes distant composure only drew him in further. The pairing raised eyebrows. He was more than 2 decades her senior, flamboyant and loud to her, quiet and reserved. But the two found genuine chemistry. They shared a love of glamour, and Donald's confidence mirrored that of Melania's own father, Victor, in age and even appearance. Despite her boyfriend's fame, Melania remained focused on her own work. She continued taking on modeling assignments, and Donald, proud of her beauty, leveraged his connections to bolster her career. He lobbied magazines to feature her, and even had her as one of the first signees to a modeling agency he launched in 1999. Melania began appearing in more high-profile shoots, including a now infamous January 2000 GQ spread, where she posed nude on a fur blanket on Trump's private jet. She would later say she was proud of these risque photos, unapologetic about her past work. In public, Trump loved to show Melania off, seating the elegant brunette beside him at boxing matches, premieres, and on the radio with shock jock Howard Stern, who once prompted the couple into a lewd on-air conversation that splashed across headlines. Melania mostly smiled through it, declining to divulge much. She understood the performance expected as the girlfriend on Donald Trump's arm, but she kept a demure profile, rarely speaking out of turn. One rare exception came in 1999. Donald was toying with running for president on the Reform Party ticket, and when the New York Times asked Melania how she'd feel about being First Lady, she replied she would be very traditional, like Betty Ford or Jackie Kennedy. The comment was sincere and showed that even then, she had a clear sense of the kind of First Lady she might one day be: supportive, stylish, and not overtly political. The tabloids ate it up, marveling at the possibility of a supermodel in the White House. Not everything was fairy tale perfect in those early years with Donald. In 2000, after about 2 years of dating, the couple hit a rough patch and briefly broke up, with rumors swirling that Melania had decided to leave after catching Donald escorting an ex-girlfriend out of Trump Tower. For a few months they kept their distance, and gossip pages speculated that the romance was over. But by that summer, they quietly reconciled. Melania had by then invested a lot in the relationship, and Donald, for all his bluster, valued her loyalty and calm presence. She had also become close with his children. Donald's youngest daughter, Tiffany, just a little girl then, adored Melania, who in turn made a special effort to include Tiffany so she wouldn't feel like an outsider among the older Trump siblings. In 2001, Melania achieved a personal milestone that had nothing to do with modeling or society pages. She received her green card, granting her permanent residency in the United States. She had applied in the elite EB-1 program, the so-called Einstein visa, on the strength of her modeling accolades, and was approved. It was a proud moment for the once small-town girl turned immigrant success story. With residency secured, Melania's ties to America and to Donald grew deeper. The pair moved into a luxurious triplex together in Trump Tower in 2002, and Melania began to step back from full-time modeling. By her early 30s, she was taking far fewer jobs, content to enjoy a life of comfort and travel with the man she now expected to marry. Donald Trump proposed to Melania on the night of her 34th birthday, 2004. Ever the showman, he chose the occasion of the glitzy Met Gala in New York to present a dazzling $1.5 million diamond ring. He later boasted he got a discount as they prepared to head to the event. Melania accepted, and unlike Donald's previous rocky romances, there was little drama. She signed a prenuptial agreement without complaint, eager, it seemed, to formalize their partnership on his terms. In the months before the wedding, Vogue editor Anna Wintour accompanied Melania in search of the perfect gown. She settled on an opulent white satin dress by John Galliano, so massive with its billowing skirt and embroidery that it reportedly weighed 60 pounds. The bride-to-be even graced the cover of Vogue in that gown, looking every inch a princess about to marry her prince. And marry him she did. In early 2005, Melania and Donald Trump exchanged vows in Palm Beach, followed by an extravagant reception at Mar-a-Lago. The guest list was a snapshot of high society and politics. Bill and Hillary Clinton famously attended, mingling at the reception with celebrities from Simon Cowell to Billy Joel. Wearing a $200,000 Dior wedding dress and a radiant smile, Melania had transformed from an under-the-radar model into the new Mrs. Trump, front and center, in one of the most talked-about weddings of the year. Ever practical, she orchestrated the details of the day herself, with a planner, leaving nothing to chance. She even vetoed Donald's idea of broadcasting their nuptials on TV. A private wedding, not a reality show, she insisted. It was perhaps the first clear sign of Melania's instinct to draw a line between the couple's public spectacle and her personal life. Now settled into marriage, Melania navigated the role of a billionaire's wife in the public eye with the same understated poise she had shown as a model. In the early years of their union, the Trumps maintained 3 primary homes: Trump Tower in Manhattan, a golf estate in Bedminster, New Jersey, and Mar-a-Lago in Florida. And Melania effortlessly bounced between them. To carve out a space of her own amid Donald's lavish properties, she oversaw the construction of a private penthouse spa just for her at Trump Tower. She and Donald were often in the same place, but not necessarily together. As Donald put it, their relationship thrived on a certain independence, each with their own quarters and routines. He worked non-stop and was content that Melania did not nag him. Indeed, he never learned Slovene, and she never pressed him to, later shrugging that she was not a nagging wife. Melania seemed to accept the transactional elements of their marriage openly. Donald provided her a life of security and luxury. She provided him loyalty, beauty, and the calm companionship he craved without challenging his ego. Those close to her insist there was genuine care between them, even if outsiders sometimes labeled Melania a gold digger, a notion she and Donald both dismissed. In public, she would accompany him to events at his clubs, typically staying only a brief time, just enough to smile for cameras, before quietly excusing herself and retreating to privacy. This pattern set the tone for what would later become her approach as a political spouse. Supportive but never spotlight-seeking, motherhood brought Melania another profound change. On March 20th, 2006, at a hospital in Manhattan, she gave birth to Baron William Trump, her first and only child, Donald's 5th. Melania was 36, and she embraced motherhood with devotion. She had spent her pregnancy preparing fastidiously, supervising a lavish nursery at Trump Tower, and even hosting an extravagant baby shower at FAO Schwartz Toy Store, after which she donated all the gifts to a local children's hospital. When Baron arrived, Melania insisted on being a full-time, hands-on mom. The new mother famously eschewed hiring a large staff of nannies, using a baby nurse only briefly, and took on the daily work of child-rearing herself. It meant late nights and early mornings with the baby, and far fewer nights out on the town. Donald had made it explicitly clear to Melania that if they had a child, the child-rearing would be almost entirely her domain. He would not be changing diapers or putting Baron to bed, Melania recounted, and she was perfectly fine with that. She didn't expect a hands-on dad, perhaps a wise calibration of expectations, given Donald's track record. True to his word, Donald doted on Baron but from a distance, while Melania immersed herself in parenting. In those early years, mother and son were nearly inseparable. Melania's public appearances dwindled. She skipped glitzy events to stay home with crayons and bedtime stories. And when she did accompany her husband, Baron was often in tow, a toddler in a tiny suit holding his mother's hand on the red carpet. Melania's focus on family did not entirely sideline her personal ambitions. With her modeling career effectively behind her, she looked for new projects that could offer both creative outlet and business opportunity on a schedule that fit motherhood. In 2010, drawing on her lifelong love of design, she launched a jewelry line simply called Melania on QVC. The collection featured affordable watches and baubles inspired by places she knew well: New York City's skyline, the palm trees of Palm Beach, the elegance of Paris. Deliberately, she kept the Trump name off the brand. Reporters who called it Melania Trump jewelry were corrected. It was just Melania. The line was a hit, selling out repeatedly on TV. For someone who had once struggled to pay rent, seeing her designs on customers across America was deeply satisfying. She later ventured into high-end skincare, developing Melania Beauty caviar-infused creams in 2011. This second venture proved bumpier. A deal with a manufacturer fell apart amid a corporate shakeup, and Melania ended up suing for breach of contract, claiming $50 million in damages for lost potential income. After a legal battle, she won a settlement out of court in her favor. The skincare line never actually made it to market, but the episode showed Melania's resolve in business. She was unafraid to go to court to defend her interests, even if it meant tangling with former friends. By the mid-2000s, Melania Trump's life seemed comfortably set. A supportive wife, a doting mother, and a small-scale entrepreneur with a distinct aversion to publicity. No one could have guessed that the biggest jolt was yet to come, one that would thrust this private woman under the harshest public spotlight in the world. In early 2015, as Donald Trump toyed openly with a run for the US presidency, Melania was among the few who took the idea seriously. For years, she had heard her husband talk about wanting to run. Now she grew tired of the idle chatter. According to insiders, it was Melania who finally snapped and told Donald, essentially, "It's now or never. Either jump into the 2016 presidential race or stop talking about it." In her straightforward way, she challenged him to put up or hush up, not realizing she was effectively nudging him and herself into a whirlwind. Donald heeded her advice. When he rode down the golden escalator in Trump Tower in June 2015 to announce his candidacy, Melania was at his side, composed in a white dress and smiling softly. But privately, she set clear boundaries for what this campaign would mean for her life. She informed Donald and his team that she would not be a constant presence on the trail. She was a mother first, and Barron, then 9 years old, needed her at home in New York. Unlike nearly every political spouse in modern memory, Melania intended to stay mostly in the background. It was an unconventional arrangement, but Donald agreed. So while cable news filled daily with Trump rallies and outrageous sound bites, Melania Trump stayed in Manhattan, dutifully dropping off Barron at school each morning and keeping his life as normal as possible. She did follow the campaign closely from afar, watching debates on TV, studying polling data, and offering her husband candid critiques by phone after his big speeches. In her own quiet way, she became one of his trusted advisors, encouraging Donald to follow his gut and be authentic, though she gently urged him to tone down the profanity. When she did make rare appearances, Melania's former career proved an asset. Standing poised behind a podium or in front of cameras was second nature. She needed no hired stylist or coaching on how to walk in heels on stage. Still, she was often described in the press as reclusive or shy. Melania bristled at that characterization, remarking that people who called her shy only briefly met me and want their 15 minutes of fame. In truth, she was not shy, but deliberately low-key. The campaign staff realized that in Melania they had a secret weapon. As an immigrant who attained the American dream, she could potentially soften Donald's abrasive image and appeal to voters' ideals. But coaxing her out on the trail was challenging. A young aide, Hope Hicks, became the go-between, suggesting events that Melania might find meaningful. When Melania did agree to speak, it was often in pivotal swing states, and her speeches focused on personal anecdotes and praise for her husband's character, steering clear of policy. Notably, she had a quiet role in a major campaign decision. Melania sat in on interviews with potential vice presidential picks in 2016, and it was her favorable impression of Mike Pence, whom she judged not too ambitious and therefore loyal, that helped clinch Pence's selection. Even behind the scenes, Melania's instincts were having an impact on American politics. As the campaign barreled toward the general election, Melania faced her own share of public scrutiny and trials. In the spring of 2016, anti-Trump forces circulated an old British GQ magazine photo of a nude Melania posing handcuffed to a briefcase, a decade-old modeling shot meant to shock. A billboard in Utah blared, "Meet Melania Trump, your next First Lady," over the racy image. Melania was humiliated, and for 2 months that summer, she virtually disappeared from any campaign activities. Then, in July 2016, at the Republican National Convention in Cleveland, she stepped onto the national stage in a big way. Melania delivered the keynote speech introducing her husband to the convention, her first major speech of the campaign. Initially, it earned praise. She spoke in polished tones about her upbringing and values. But within hours, observers noticed striking similarities between Melania's words and Michelle Obama's 2008 convention speech for her own husband. Whole phrases had been nearly identical. A plagiarism scandal exploded. Melania, who had said on television that she wrote the speech with as little help as possible, was mortified. Donald was furious at his staff for failing to vet the speech, and Melania reportedly felt she had failed the campaign by allowing such a mistake. The campaign hastily produced a speechwriter to apologize for an inadvertent misunderstanding. After that, Melania virtually vanished from the trail, retreating to New York in embarrassment. And the timing couldn't have been worse, because the next scandal would hit her marriage, not her speech. Then, in October 2016, just a month before Election Day, the infamous Access Hollywood tape leaked. If you think that would have ended most marriages, watch what Melania did next. In that 2005 recording, Donald Trump, newly married to Melania at the time, was heard bragging in vulgar terms about forcing himself on women. "Grab them by the piquai," he said. It was a devastating moment for Melania. She had been at home in Trump Tower when the news broke. Donald did not face her until 2 hours after the story hit. According to later reports, when he walked into the room, Melania's face was like stone. She then left him to stew. That weekend, as advisors urged the candidate to do damage control, Melania refused to appear on camera as a prop for forgiveness. She would not do the typical "stand by your man" mea culpa interview. Instead, she issued a brief written statement saying the words her husband spoke did not represent the man I know, while condemning his language. Privately, she was furious and kept her distance for some days. When Donald delivered a public apology video, Melania sat off to the side, not beside him. A few days later, she attended the next presidential debate, not in somber resolve, but wearing a bright pink pussy bow blouse, a fashion choice that many took as a sly rebuke or ironic comment on the scandal. Melania never confirmed any hidden meaning, but the media frenzy over her outfit showed how even her clothing had become a tool of interpretation. Through the humiliation and anger, Melania stayed outwardly composed. She granted one CNN interview in which she called her husband's words "boy talk" and said she had forgiven him, deftly turning attention to more pressing campaign matters. It was a defining test of their marriage on the world stage, and Melania passed it in her own stoic style. Rather than meltdown or martyrdom, she responded with a measured defense and moved forward. Many observers noted her grace under pressure, even if they were unsure what she truly felt inside. On November 8, 2016, Donald Trump shocked the world by winning the US presidency. As he gave a victory speech in the early hours, Melania stood at his side in a white jumpsuit, smiling radiantly at the crowd. But the whirlwind was just beginning for her. In January 2017, Melania Trump became the First Lady of the United States, the first foreign-born First Lady since Louisa Adams in the 1820s, and notably the first who had become a US citizen only by naturalization. She was also the first presidential spouse whose native language was not English. these historic distinctions were lost in the tumult of Inauguration Day. Melania appeared elegant in a powder blue Ralph Lauren suit at the swearing-in, evoking Jackie Kennedy's style. Yet behind the scenes, she was making an unprecedented decision. Unlike her predecessors, Melania announced she would not move into the White House immediately. Instead, she stayed back in New York with Barron, citing his mid-school year schedule. Some wondered if it was truly for Barron, or if Melania simply needed time to adjust or renegotiate. Some accounts claimed that during those months, Melania quietly renegotiated the family terms, focused above all on Barron's future. Her office disputed the idea. Either way, it raised the same question. Was this delay really about school or about leverage? Whatever her reasons, Melania's delayed move was unprecedented, and it set tongues wagging in Washington. Would Ivanka Trump, the president's influential daughter, act as de facto First Lady in Melania's stead? Some in the West Wing thought so. White House staff grew frustrated, leaking complaints that Melania's absence caused a backlog of East Wing operations like tours and events. In New York, local taxpayers grumbled at the security costs of protecting the First Lady in her Manhattan tower. It was a bumpy start, and Melania's public image suffered early on from perceptions that she was disengaged. When Melania and Barron finally moved into the White House in June 2017, the First Lady quietly began to shape her role, on her own terms. One of her first priorities was family and tradition. In Washington, she maintained a low event schedule, spending mornings getting Barron off to his new school and checking on her parents, who had also relocated to D.C. Amalia and Victor Canavs would later become U.S. citizens in 2018, thanks to Melania sponsoring them through the same chain migration process her husband often railed against. Within the White House residence, Melania enlisted a decorator to refresh the living quarters, replacing much of the Obama-era decor with her own sleek, muted taste. She oversaw these changes personally, and like the Obamas before, the Trumps paid for the redecorations out of pocket. Staff noted that Melania ran a tight ship in the East Wing. She hired a smaller team than previous First Ladies, just a fraction of Michelle Obama's staff, and was adamant that no press releases or statements went out under her name unless she approved them herself. Aides who expected glamour and drama found instead a no-nonsense boss who valued loyalty and discretion. Drama-free was how one staffer described her operation. Indeed, Melania developed deep trust in her core team, protecting them fiercely if any West Wing infighting arose. She also became the First Lady in modern memory to answer many of her own letters. Eschewing the army of correspondence secretaries, she would personally read and sign responses to children who wrote her or to citizens with concerns, believing it important to maintain that human touch. In public, Melania's appearances were carefully choreographed but infrequent. She gave remarkably few speeches, only 8 in the entirety of 2017, compared to dozens by her predecessors. She preferred communicating via one-way channels, like social media posts or short video messages. An early controversy erupted when the official White House website's biography of Melania touted her now-defunct jewelry business, drawing criticism that she might be using her position to advertise her brand. The reference was quickly removed, but not before headlines noted the lapse. A more serious situation arose in February 2017. Melania filed a libel lawsuit against the Daily Mail, a British tabloid that had repeated an unsupported allegation that she once worked as an escort in the 1990s. In her legal filing, Melania initially claimed the article had damaged her once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to launch products as First Lady, implying she intended to commercialize her new title. Critics pounced, suggesting she saw the East Wing as a branding platform. Melania's lawyers revised the complaint to focus on her personal distress and dropped the business angle. She eventually won an apology and a settlement reportedly worth millions from the Daily Mail, vindicating her fight for her reputation. Through it all, Melania kept her public comments minimal. When March 2017 arrived, she stepped out to host an International Women's Day luncheon at the White House, one of her first solo events. Speaking in her soft, accented voice, she shared the story of her own journey as an immigrant and stressed the importance of education and equality for women and girls. It was a cause that resonated with her personal narrative, and it offered Americans a rare glimpse of Melania's values. By spring 2017, Melania had also begun to reveal a quiet, independent streak in subtle ways. During the Trump's first trip abroad in May, a small gesture went viral. As the President and First Lady arrived in Tel Aviv and walked alongside Israel's Prime Minister, cameras caught Donald reaching back to hold Melania's hand, only for her to swat his hand away with a flick of her wrist. The clip replayed endlessly, the world reading into it signs of private frustration. It was the first time many realized that behind Melania's composed smile lay her own mind and perhaps grievances. She never commented on hand slapgate, but the message was clear enough. When displeased, she would show it, however subtly. Later that year, another moment of quiet assertion came after reports surfaced of Donald's past infidelities. In January 2018, after news broke of an alleged affair and payoff to adult film actress Stormy Daniels, Melania conspicuously traveled separately to the State of the Union address and arrived at the Capitol independently, the First Lady to do so. She wore a white pantsuit, coincidentally or not, the color of suffragettes and of Hillary Clinton's signature outfit, and offered a brisk applause during the speech, but her face remained inscrutable. Though she said nothing publicly, many sensed a rift. Through that turbulent time, Melania channeled her energy into a signature initiative. In May 2018, she formally launched Be Best, a campaign dedicated to children's well-being with an emphasis on kindness and safe use of social media. With bullying and online toxicity rampant, it was a noble cause. But given her husband's penchant for caustic tweets, late-night comedians had a field day with the irony. Melania pressed on regardless, visiting schools and hospitals to promote emotional health, kindness, and anti-bullying programs. "I ask you all to join me in choosing respect and compassion," she said in one speech, gently urging a better example for youth. Be Best was sometimes mocked for its vague name or borrowed policy booklets, but Melania remained committed. It was an initiative clearly close to her heart as a mother. She traveled to Tennessee to combat the opioid crisis's effect on newborns, to Washington State to meet Microsoft about online safety, quietly doing the work, if not always getting much credit. That summer of 2018 tested Melania like never before. In June, America was roiled by images of migrant children separated from their parents at the US-Mexico border due to the Trump administration's new zero-tolerance policy. While Donald publicly defended the hardline approach, Melania privately disagreed. She had immigrated the right way, she believed, and had little tolerance for law-breaking, but separating families struck her as unnecessarily cruel. She expressed her concerns to her husband and aides. According to later accounts, Melania was one of the voices who convinced Donald to sign an executive order ending the family separation policy. The First Lady even took the unusual step of issuing a statement that she hates to see children separated from their families and urging a bipartisan fix. It was a cautious but clear rebuke. Not content with words, Melania decided to visit a Texas shelter housing affected children. In June 2018, she boarded her plane for an unannounced visit to a Texas shelter, wearing simple slacks and a green hooded jacket. When she stepped off the plane, cameras caught the message on her back. "I really don't care, do you?" The message, literally on her back, ignited a firestorm. In the context of visiting displaced children, it seemed shockingly callous. The media and public demanded an explanation. Was the First Lady, normally so careful, really so tone-deaf? Her spokesperson frantically insisted, "It's just a jacket. There was no hidden message." President Trump later contradicted that, tweeting that the words were aimed at the fake news media. Others speculated Melania was sending a pointed signal of loyalty to her husband's base, or perhaps a covert shot at him or at critics. The incident, dubbed Jacketgate, dominated news cycles. Melania, for her part, brushed it off. "It was for the people and for the left-wing media who are criticizing me," she said later of the jacket, maintaining that it was intended as a sort of provocation at those who focused on her attire over her actions. Whatever the truth, the episode encapsulated the mystery of Melania. Was she a sympathetic actor trying to do right, or an enigmatic figure sending signals only she understood? In Texas, she did spend time comforting children in the shelter, but that tender scene was overshadowed by the garment controversy. Once again, her careful attempt to assert herself had backfired in spectacle. Summer 2018 brought more trials. That July, Melania underwent surgery for a benign kidney condition, spending several days in the hospital and a few weeks out of sight. The sudden health scare, though minor, sparked wild theories since the First Lady's office revealed so few details. Some even concocted conspiracies that she had vanished or left her husband. She resurfaced quietly, smiling but perhaps a bit thinner to dispel the rumors. In October 2018, Melania embarked on her first big solo international tour as First Lady, a goodwill trip to Africa. She visited Ghana, Malawi, Kenya, and Egypt, highlighting child welfare and education. She bottle-fed baby elephants and danced with school children, seemingly in her element far from Washington politics. Yet controversy trailed her even there. In Nairobi, she donned a white pith helmet during a safari, a symbol painfully evocative of colonial rule in Africa. Many criticized her fashion choice as insensitive. Melania dismissively responded that people were focusing on trivia instead of the good purpose of her trip. But the images spread. The elegant First Lady in a colonial-era hat, standing next to wild animals, an unintended metaphor for missteps. Frustrated, Melania gave a rare, candid interview during the trip, saying that she believed she was one of the most bullied people in the world in terms of public attacks, and declaring that without evidence, she felt certain White House aides had tried to undermine her. It was an extraordinary admission. She also made news by bluntly stating that women alleging sexual abuse must have really hard evidence for their claims, a remark that delighted her husband's supporters and angered Yoruba Me Too activists. Through late 2018, one of Melania's trusted East Wing aides, Stephanie Winston Wolkoff, fell from grace after inaugural committee spending controversies. Melania cut ties, demonstrating her willingness to drop even close friends if they threatened her image. In an unprecedented move that November, Melania's office publicly called for the firing of Deputy National Security Advisor Mira Ricardel after a spat during the Africa tour. Ricardel allegedly slighted Melania's staff over seating on the plane. The deputy was promptly ousted. It was now clear that Melania, often underestimated, could exercise influence and power when she wanted to. "She's more like her husband than it appears," one official observed. If crossed, she could be steely and assertive, and she would always protect her image and those loyal to her above all else. By 2019, Melania had settled into a stable, if somewhat distant, rhythm as First Lady. She continued to limit interviews and unscripted moments, focusing instead on the ceremonial parts of the job she did enjoy, planning elegant state dinners. She won praise for a beautifully executed French state visit dinner in 2018, overseeing the White House's Christmas decor, which garnered both admiration and puzzled memes, as when she lined the halls with blood-red cranberry trees one year. And above all, continuing her visits to children's programs under the Be Best banner. White House insiders noted she had a calming effect on President Trump in private. During particularly tense episodes, like staff departures or policy rifts, Donald would often make reference to consulting Melania. She had no official portfolio, but he valued her gut instincts and outsider's perspective. For instance, in September 2019, when teen vaping became a national concern, it was Melania's urging, spurred by her worry as a mother, that pushed Donald to agree to ban fruity-flavored e-cigarettes that attracted kids. "She's got a son, together. That is a beautiful young man, and she feels very strongly about it," Donald said, crediting Melania as he announced the flavor ban. Time and again, this private influence surfaced. When scandal swirled about migrant family separations, we saw Melania's imprint on the eventual policy reversal. When personnel change was needed, as with Ricardel, Melania's word proved decisive. Despite scant public speaking, she was not a mere bystander. As her tenure continued, she even found small ways to enjoy it. She formed a close bond with her devoted chief of staff, Lindsay Reynolds, and press secretary Stephanie Grisham, and was known to share warm tea with them in the residence, exchanging stories. Staff loyalty to MT, as some called her, was intense. They appreciated that she never yelled, never humiliated them, and often remembered birthdays with personal notes. In a West Wing often in chaos, Melania's East Wing was a quiet harbor of professionalism. 2020 brought the crucible of a re-election campaign, this time with Melania as a seasoned First Lady. True to form, she kept a low profile for most of it. When the COVID-19 pandemic swept the nation, Melania was supportive of public health measures. She even posted a photo wearing a mask, in contrast to her husband's reluctance at the time. Behind the scenes, she advocated caution and encouraged Donald to take the virus seriously. In August 2020, she made one of her most consequential speeches at the Republican National Convention, delivering her address live from the White House Rose Garden, a garden she had recently renovated to feature a cleaner design, controversially removing some historic cherry trees. Speaking in measured tones, she expressed sympathy for COVID victims and called for unity, a notably softer message than the campaign's usual red meat. It was well received, showcasing Melania's ability to rise to a big occasion. In October, however, both she and the president were diagnosed with COVID-19. Melania experienced a mild course of illness, but opted for privacy, convalescing in the White House residence and later writing a personal essay about treating herself with vitamins and healthy food rather than aggressive therapeutics. Once recovered, she made one of her few campaign trail appearances in the final week of the race, addressing a rally in Pennsylvania. It was clear she still believed in Donald's chances. Just as in 2016, she was among the few true believers. But on election night 2020, as returns came in, it became apparent that Joe Biden would unseat her husband. Melania reportedly urged Donald to accept the result, but publicly she towed the line. When Donald refused to concede and propagated claims of fraud, Melania cautiously backed him. In private, one aide said, her attitude was resigned. She was ready to return to Florida and a quieter life, but she would not break ranks with her husband's stance. On January 6, 2021, as a violent mob of Trump's supporters stormed the Capitol, Melania was at the White House overseeing a photo shoot of rugs and decor. She did not emerge to make any statement that day. Only on January 11th did she issue a written condemnation of the violence, pointedly adding that she was disappointed to have her name dragged into gossip, a reference to reports that one of the rioters had been photographed with someone allegedly close to Melania. The statement struck some as self-centered, but it was pure Melania. Dutifully denounce the obvious wrong and simultaneously reaffirm her own dignity. In the final weeks, as the Trumps prepared to leave Washington, Melania stayed out of the fray. Unlike previous outgoing First Ladies, she did not invite Dr. Jill Biden to tour the residence, breaking a long-standing gracious transition ritual. Instead, on January 20th, 2021, Melania departed the White House quietly with Donald hours before the inauguration of Biden, wearing large sunglasses and a black designer outfit. She left with approval ratings higher than her husband's, but lower than any modern First Lady at exit. The tumult and controversies had taken a toll. As their helicopter lifted off, Melania Trump's active chapter in public life seemed to close, at least for that moment. Returning to private citizen life, Melania slipped back into the shadows at Mar-a-Lago, the Trumps' estate in Florida. In those initial post-White House months, she was rarely seen. Aides confirmed she set up a small office to continue best work and manage her correspondence, but she kept a deliberately low profile. The spotlight of Washington had never been comfortable. Now she savored being out of it. She spent her days caring for Barron, who was growing into a tall teenager, and often visited her parents, who lived nearby in Palm Beach. Occasionally, guests at Mar-a-Lago would spot Melania by the pool or hosting a small dinner, always polite but guarded. When Donald faced multiple legal battles and even indictments in the years after his presidency, Melania conspicuously stayed silent on the controversies. Those close to her noted that she was unflustered. She had weathered decades of Donald being sued or in tabloids, and this was no different. Privately, she was said to be focused on family, telling friends her concern was shielding Barron from the noise. Publicly, she made only the briefest statements, usually to correct some rumor or to plug her new business endeavors, like when she launched a line of NFT digital artworks in late 2021. People wondered if she wanted Donald to run for president again. Reports emerged that Melania was not keen on returning to Washington. She had done her duty and was content for that chapter to remain closed. In 2022, when Donald indeed announced another presidential campaign, Melania's response was lukewarm in public. She did not join him at rallies or give interviews about it. But come July 2024, Melania did appear at the Republican National Convention, walking on stage in a sleek beige dress to wave alongside Donald as he accepted the nomination. Notably, she did not speak at the convention. She stood by him, smiling at the appropriate moments, but remained the only modern spouse to refrain from addressing the party that renominated her husband. It was a silent support, emblematic of her style. That fall, Melania kept doing what she had always done, advising Donald in private and avoiding controversy in public. When a brutal campaign culminated in Election Day 2024, Donald Trump stunned pollsters once more by winning back the presidency. Nearly 4 years after leaving in Marine One, Melania Trump was set to return to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue as First Lady again. She would become only the second woman in American history, after President Grover Cleveland's wife Frances, to hold the First Lady title in non-consecutive terms. If Melania felt any reluctance about resuming the role, she did not show it. "Heading to the White House for the second time is much different," she remarked in an interview shortly after the 2024 victory. This time, she said, "We know what to expect." Indeed, Melania approached January 2025 with determination. She spent the transition period packing up the family's life in Florida and vetting potential East Wing staff. "You know what you need to establish. You know what kind of people you need to hire for your office," she explained, describing how her prior experience made her more confident now. On January 20th, 2025, Melania Trump once again stood on the inaugural platform at the U.S. Capitol, holding the Bible as her husband took the oath as the 47th president. The crowd size, the political climate, everything was different, except Melania's serene presence. At 54, she was poised to reprise her uneasy place in history. This time, She seemed determined to make it her own. In one of her few media appearances, she praised her now 18-year-old son Baron for helping his father's campaign reach young people via social media. Proud and fiercely protective of Baron, Melania made clear that her family would remain a priority above all. If the first term had been about learning the ropes, the second promised a chance for Melania to refine her legacy. She relaunched her Be Best initiative with added components on online safety and youth employment. And picking up where she left off, she devoted attention to the White House itself, within weeks unveiling a new decor theme for the holidays. In December 2025, Melania decked the White House halls in a motif she called "Home is where the heart is," adorning trees with ornaments made by children from all 50 states. She traveled to a children's hospital in Washington, carrying toys and gentle smiles. "I wish you strength and to enjoy these beautiful gifts," she told young patients, encouraging them to stay positive as Christmas neared. At the annual National Christmas tree lighting, she stood beside her husband on the ellipse. As the president counted down, Melania pressed the button to illuminate the majestic tree in front of a cheering crowd. The lights sparkled, cameras flashed. Melania, bathed in the warm glow, clapped softly and gazed up at the tree's star. It was a small but meaningful moment. A once reluctant public figure, now more comfortably embracing a ceremonial joy of her position. Melania Trump's journey, from a quiet childhood in Slovenia to the pinnacle of American public life, has been anything but ordinary. She has been praised and pilloried, often underestimated, yet she endures with a unique stoicism. Along the way, she learned to navigate power and spotlight while fiercely guarding her privacy. Those searching her face for clues to her inner feelings often come away empty-handed. Melania prefers to let her actions speak. The child who altered her own clothes became the first lady who championed children's causes. The immigrant who arrived with a single suitcase ended up advising a president on policy and strategy. History will remember her as only the second foreign-born and the first naturalized American to serve as First Lady, and as a presidential spouse who twice entered and left the White House on her own quiet terms. In the twilight of 2025, as holiday music drifted through the decorated halls of the White House, Melania Trump could be seen pausing by a portrait in the corridor, the image of Jackie Kennedy. It was said Jackie brought elegance and restraint to that house in turbulent times, focusing on family and style amidst chaos. Melania's own time in the role has echoed those themes. Through scandals and triumphs, she remained an inscrutable pillar at the center of it all. And now she's back for a second tenure, older, sharper, and far less naive about how Washington works. The question isn't whether Melania can survive another turn in the spotlight. It's whether this time she'll finally choose to be seen or disappear again behind that same unreadable smile.